in light of this pandemic than less busy. And with all your responsibilities, I want to thank you. We're here live with Dr. Alvin Bernstine, and he's been kind enough to continue this conversation with us on prophetic preaching during the pandemic. We were yesterday able to have, excuse me, an extended conversation with Dr. Tellis Chapman, and on tomorrow we look forward to having a wonderful conversation with Dr. Freddie Haynes. I want to begin today by asking Pastor, if you could tell us just a little bit about your background. We was just talking about one of the places you studied and what it means to you, and just a general overview of your life and ministry.
Well, I probably like so many young Black boys who was born poor. My initial aspiration was to do something about being poor. So, yes, and I discovered very quickly that working with limited skills was not going to produce me no great income, and selling drugs wasn't going to do nothing but get me in jail.
Yes, sir.
So I went to Laney College to try to sharpen my business skills and become an entrepreneur. And so I was trying to be an entrepreneur and work for myself. I was inspired by the self-determination of the Black Muslims. Many of them were my tutors. And they helped me understand Black termination and Black pride. And then I fooled around and got called to preach.
Yes,
and that disrupted my business aspirations. And I wanted to try to make some sense out of preaching. So I transferred out of Laney to Bishop College. And I was introduced to so many phenomenal people, not just some amazing students like your guest tomorrow, Freddie Haynes. He was a student there. He wasn't even preaching when I came. He was going to school to be a teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He got called to preach on the line, on the Alpha line. I guess that God got his attention on the line, I guess. And, but I met so many amazing people there, amazing young people. Ralph West was one. And and then the amazing people used to have this thing called the L.K. Williams Ministers Institute. So I heard preaching at its best in the Black tradition. And so I was always impressed by preaching, but I was impressed by preaching that would make a difference in the lives of Black people. Because as I aforementioned, people who mentored me early during my very formative years as as adult was Black Muslims. Mm-hmm. And so that lens that they brought to life and to the text has always influenced me. Although it was something about the Muslim faith as it was being practiced before me, it didn't appeal to me, as did the presentation of a Black Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so Bishop College exposed me to some of the best preaching. And once I finished Bishop, I felt a dissatisfaction. I felt like I hadn't really did everything that I could do to prepare myself. And so I applied to Howard. I was accepted to Howard. I got a fellowship at Northern University, which was going to be in counseling. But I didn't feel at that time that was going to help me with preaching. It probably would have, but I didn't feel it. So
yes, sir.
I was asked to come to tour Vanderbilt Divinity School, and they made it possible for me to come there and look at the school. The school didn't necessarily appeal to me externally, because I didn't know anything about Nashville, So I called my uncle. I was getting ready to go to Howard. And my uncle told me that Howard's a great school if you want to be a good teacher, but if you want to be a good preacher, he told me to stay at Vanderbilt and to hook up with Kelly Miller Smith. Kelly Miller Smith, he's dead now.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book on prophetic preaching.
Mm-hmm.
So that began my evolution. Although I was taught by Kelly, I didn't attend his church. I attended the church of Dr. Amos Jones Jr.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was at the Westwood Baptist Church University Center.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a graduate of Vanderbilt. He went there and got his master's and his doctorate degree. And he would every Sunday, he would come before us. He'd come out, he had a little old black pamphlet or something where he had then typed his sermon into. But he would make what I was learning about biblical studies and preaching, he would make it real, particularly as it applied to the struggles of Black people. So for 3 years, I was immersed in the prophetic tradition because that was different for me, because the preachers who I came up under as a kid, they were basically preachers who, for the most part, came out of quartets, and they were just up there humming. They might say something. My dad was one. But they had the best of intentions. They had good hearts, but their messages were not that compelling in terms of making a difference in the lives of Black people. But Dr. Amos Jones made that thing real for me, man. And then American Baptist College was there, and they would have these Garnet neighborhood lectures. And so they would bring in all types of people. And Dr. Jones, he was hooked up with the National Baptist Convention. And so that connected me with so many amazing preachers. And then I got a chance to go to the Congress of Christian Education, and I would sit under the tutelage of the late Manuel Scott Sr. That was like, to me, that was like going to school. Because he brought a pastoral heart, but he brought a prophetic zeal. So I was just exposed to such tremendous preaching by the generation that went before me. I had opportunity, to ride around with people like Miles Jones, Jesse Jackson, Samuel DeWitt Proctor. He basically really shifted preaching for me altogether. And so that was kind of my journey. And then I got called to preach. And so I tried to bring that kind of passion that I heard from my mentors. I tried to bring that to the preaching process as a young preacher. Although I quickly discovered that churches, traditional churches like the one I started off in, they really not interested in no prophetic lens being brought to the text. They just want to have church, So that was a struggle for me. But I was blessed to come under the tutelage of the late Henry Mitchell. And Henry Mitchell said, he told me, he said, "Now, Bernstine, you probably ain't gonna do no good getting there aggravating the people, with all of your Black stuff, So why don't you, you release that stuff probably in classes or in small groups, but try to minister, pastor to these people until they know you love them. And then once they know you love them, then you can come on and preach whatever God gives you to preach." Wow. And that to me was wisdom for the ages. Yeah.
Yeah. Where were you born and raised?
And I was born and raised in Oakland, California. I was blessed, though, to have Oakland and Richmond. Richmond was the church where my people, Richmond was the city rather, where my people migrated from the South.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like family based. That was our family base. But I lived from the age, probably I think from 3 or 4 on up in Oakland, California. Began on the avenues, but we ended up in East Oakland. They call it Deep East now, but it was a beautiful place when we came. I grew up in Sabrani Park. Yeah, and I was born and raised during, you know, the turbulent times of the civil rights movement. Man, I watched the emergence of the Black Panthers. I lived that stuff with the Black Panthers, the Black Muslims. You know, I lived in the midst of that stuff. However, I knew I couldn't come home, you know, talking about my daddy talking about no assalamu alaikum. That wouldn't have worked in no Alvin Bernstine.
Your dad was a pastor?
Yeah. Daddy was a pastor. He was bivocational. And he organized a church in our living room. I was 8 years old. He organized a church in our living room, the New Nazarene Missionary Baptist Church. And it was made up of people who were first generation migrants from the South. And most of them were a little disgruntled because of the pastoral change at the Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church, where I now pastor. But Dr. A.H. Newman came in right after the founding pastor, Reverend Nathaniel Fanoff. Reverend Fanoff had a discretion that became quite explosive in the life of the church, and he had to leave. And he had grown that church, man, under Fanoff. Bethlehem had at least 1,300 people. People used to look in the window, come. They couldn't get in the church, but they'd come and they'd open up the window. People would be leaning in, looking through the window. That was just how phenomenal Bethlehem was at that time. Yeah.
And when he left, your dad organized?
Yeah, he stayed for a while, but I guess a couple of things I think motivated him to organize. Certainly, I believe the unction of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
But they could not grasp the transition, the vision of A.H. Newman. Newman came in a church which was largely charismatic. They shout at the drop of a hat. You know, you drop a hat and say hallelujah, somebody gonna shout. You know, but Newman, you know, had a lot of energy. You know, it was very spiritual. But Newman came in with an intellectual bent. And, you know, so his thing, he had a saying which he thought could help him to transition the church. And I guess it did it in some way. He said it takes inspiration. He loved the inspiration, but he said, but it also takes information. So I say Fanoff, who organized the church, he focused on inspiration. It was all very, very, very emotional, but which sustained people. It held people up during that time. But Doc came in with information. And my ministry, I think, having connected with both of them, because I was blessed while at Bishop, I attended the church of Nathaniel Fanoff. He was my pastor when I was at Bishop.
Wow.
Yeah, so Fanoff's inspiration, Fanoff's inspiration, Newman information, and I think mine is prophetic transformation.
And your dad church is still in existence?
It is. It is. Dad left that church shortly before I went to Bishop College. He tried to merge a church. A church called him while he was pastor of the church he organized. And he wanted to merge them, but Daddy, he didn't lack the kind of skills to make it happen. He thought that he could just go in there and make the announcement and it happened, but it don't happen like that. You got to process people. And if he'd have processed them, I think they would have went with him.
Okay.
Because he ended up they slowly trickle over there anyway, a lot of. Yeah, but that church is still there. It's been rebuilt. I don't think many people attend it.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's still in existence.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're going to get back to much of that, and you went everywhere I wanted you to go as it relates to background. But I do want to ask you, in light of this pandemic, how you've been doing, how you've been maintaining through all this.
Well, I hope it's understood, but the social distancing that works for me. I'm an introvert. I am, I've had to embrace that's who I am. I'm an introvert. I do well by myself. Although I love people, I love, the energy people bring. I love ministering to people and all that. But the reality is sometimes that can be for me kind of overwhelming. So social distancing, that part works, that plays into my personality.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I've been able to nurture that during this period, because I can really control my interactions. And then, being alone and being in the house, that don't bother me at all. I can do that easy. Yeah. But as far as church concerned, man, I've been working probably busier than I've ever been, because I got to work so many ways to stay connected to my people. And it's just been fascinating because look, I'm on Zoom, if this pandemic brought Zoom into my world, and so I've been Zooming my Bible study. I got more people in Bible study than I've ever had. And I got people in my Bible study from around the country. Last night we had them on there from Georgia, Texas, New York, Detroit. And so that's been fascinating. And then we Zoom in our church school. We got more people in attendance in church school than we've had. And then we record our worship and post it on Facebook. So I'm learning a lot about technology, which I probably needed to be forced into learning. This pandemic has forced me into learning, and I'm going to learn more. I'm going to learn about this streaming and all this other kind of stuff. This has been fascinating for me, And so I don't think God brought the pandemic, but I think God is in the pandemic, and He can use it to His glory.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Talk to me about living in Oakland during that time, the influence of the Black Muslim. How did that happen? What was that awakening period like? And your progression, sort of, back, lack of better terms, back into Christianity, and how you can see those two worlds meshing, but with Christ being the centerpiece.
Well, to go there, I have to, growing up in the neighborhood, everybody knew everybody. And there was one young man in particular, well, he and I, we were children together. We were from kindergarten, and we loved one another. We played together. We played well together. And so in the kindergarten, we discovered something. We discovered that if you finish your work, you get to go outside and have recess and have fun. So when kindergarten finished, I'm just taking you a long way it's a short way to get to a long story.
No, take your time.
Yeah, but in the kindergarten, we discovered that if you finish your work, you can get to go out to play and, and stuff like that. So when we completed kindergarten, came back to the first grade, we thought that the kindergarten rules even stood for the first grade. So George and I, his name was George Woods, he and I, we decided that we're going to finish all of our schoolwork so we can go outside to play, so we can have recess. We 6-year-olds. And so we finished because they had these workbooks at that time. You know, they had workbooks for first grade, second grade, etc. Well, we finished the whole workbook in about 3 or 4 days. And so we thought that since we were finished, that they was going to give us time so we can go play and have fun. But that was not what they thought would be a good, you know, we six-year-old thinking. So what they ended up doing was skipping us to the 2nd grade. I spent less than a week in the 1st grade. They skipped he and I to the 2nd grade. I wasn't going because them kids were bigger than me. And I didn't know them. I knew my 1st grade crowd. But my friend George Woods, he encouraged me to come along and go with him because he was going too. And so he and I were like that. And so fast forwarding, he became a Muslim. We did everything together. I mean, you know, we from kindergarten on, we did everything together. But when I saw the Muslims, you know, they started, you know, they would be marching down our streets. I mean, they would be like military. Young men be sharp and in suits. You know, everything was changing radically, you know. And
are y'all in high school at this point?
Yes. Yeah, we were in high school. You know, we had been going through life together. You know, And man, but during the civil rights movement, things, I mean, you know, it was all on the news, the Black Panthers, Huey Newton, you know, and people start joining, my classmates start joining the Panthers, you know, they wearing their leather jackets, had them afros, you know. My daddy, he let me get a little afro and I worked hard and bought my own leather jacket. But I knew I couldn't come up in there talking about power to the people. Now, my daddy, he didn't call them Black Panthers, he called them the Panthers, you know. That was his way of letting me know I ain't embracing that.
Right.
You know, because he come up from the rural South and he knew that if blacks asserted themselves too much, Daddy knew that white people will kill you. And they were killing blacks. The police was killing blacks at that time. But with the Muslims, they gave the police pause. I could see the police were not in no hurry to take on black Muslims. And so I watched guys in the neighborhood become Muslims. And so I would be sitting and talking with them. And the first thing, you know, they teach, well, you can't be eating that pig. You can't be eating that pig, that hog, you know. So at 16, you know, I stopped eating pork because I was under the influence of the Muslim thinking. And then the Muslim was self-determination. They're out there selling bean pies and papers. They're making their own money. So I started trying to make my own money. And I was running with this Muslim guy by the name of Larry. His name was Larry Woods. He and I lived, we would buy clothes wholesale. We would fly to LA, go to San Francisco, we buy clothes wholesale, and we sell them on the streets. People thought they were hot, but we didn't care what they thought, as long as they paid us the money. You know, we let people think whatever they want to think. And man, I lived like that for about 2 or 3 years. But at the same time, I'm under the tutelage of these Muslims. You know, I had stopped going to church for some time because I didn't see, you know, they talked about the white Jesus, you know, blonde hair, blue eye. Well, you know, in my family's home, you had 3 pictures on the mantelpiece. You had Martin Luther King.
Yes, sir.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and the
Yes,
Lord's Supper. You know? So I was driven by all of that, but at the same time, I was watching our community get devastated by drugs. And I participated in some of that myself. And this is where I saw, for me, to get a challenge to embrace the Islamic faith, because the biggest drug dealers at that time were Muslims. They the one had the big sacks. You know, I said, well, how they bringing them two together? you know, you know.
Right.
And I'm looking at drugs devastate the community, you know, particularly when it came to that crack, that cocaine thing. I watched that devastate the community, and I knew that it was brothers who embraced the Muslim faith who had the bag.
Wow.
You know. And so I can't tell you, George, how it happened, but one night I went out with a guy, we was hustling, we were doing our thing, and I thought this guy would take a bullet from me. I really did. And I was out hustling, I was doing my thing. He looking at me, and something snapped in his head. And he pulled the gun, put it right to my head. And I looked at him, I thought of ways that I could, you know, disarm him, you know, and then go get my brother and we come back and retaliate. But I talked him down and we sat down. And I wanted, you know, I was basically in tears. I said, man, what's going on with you? Why you would do this to me? This was on a Thursday night. Why you want to do this to me? He had no explanation. He just thought that I was getting the best end of the deal. But I was doing most of the work. You know, I was the one hustling. He's sitting there looking at me. You know. And man, George, that was a Thursday night. I went home that night, and I can't tell you to this day, George. I can't tell nobody to this day what made me go to church.
Wow.
And I showed up at the New Nazarene Missionary Baptist Church. I really was surprised the church was still in business because I had been gone so long, and it was no part of my life for several years.
Well, a guy did just put a gun to your head, so that may have something to do with getting you to church. I mean, that's one possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it apparently it is, but I can't see that.
It was a deeper pull. I see what you mean. Yeah.
What I did come to grips with, y'all, it wasn't the gun being put to my head. It served notice to me that this is not the life I want to live. I don't want to live a life where I'm gonna have to kill somebody because I knew I wasn't no killer.
Right.
And I didn't want to be killed either. You know. Right.
So you get into the New Nazarene Missionary Baptist Church.
Right. And I walked in there, and they are kicking off the revival. You know, I don't know nothing about revival, but there was a guest preacher, and they was having a great time. His name was Charlie Hamilton. He pastored the Calvary Hill Missionary Baptist Church in Daly City. Is now the Calvary Hill Community Church in San Francisco, pastored by Joseph Bryan Jr. But Charlie Hamilton was up there preaching. He was preaching from John 3. John 3 and 1, the Nicodemus story. And his sermon was entitled, "It's Up to You." And I don't know how he exegeted the text or anything like that, but I'll never forget the sermon. And when he finished, they opened the doors of church. Well, I ain't never knew nothing about what that meant, you know, because I was born in church, you know. And so I walked down the aisle and the church turned upside down. It was like when I walked down the aisle, they were seeing an answered prayer. Because I guess them people had been praying for me because they knew I was out in the world, and they knew it was a dangerous world that I was out there being a part of. And I walked down that aisle, and man, I've been in the church ever since. You know, I came in, I got in the choir, I started training to try to be a deacon. But that wasn't what the Lord had planned for me. And so shortly after joining church, I guess about a month or so later, it was so cryptic, I know, but my daddy understood what I was saying. And because I had came to daddy, and because it's like I was losing my mind, like I was literally losing my mind. And I'll never forget this, George. My daddy had some big hands, some very large hands. I came to the church during the week and knocked on the door, and daddy was in his study, little bitty study. But he was in there doing something, I guess. Daddy put them big old hands, laid them on my head and prayed for me. My daddy dead now. But Daddy prayed for me. And Daddy prayed that, Lord, show him, I remember his prayer, show him what you've shown me.
Mm.
And that made it clear. And when I confessed, accepted my call, whatever psychological cloud was hovering over me, it was lifted. You know, that sense of despair that I was, an internal unrest, all that was lifted.
Mm.
And man, it's been an upward trajectory ever since.
So you were doing ministry at New Nazarene, not at your dad's church?
I was doing ministry at New Nazarene. My dad was the pastor of New Nazarene. But I still had my old, you know, my Muslim buddies, but I wasn't hanging with them no more.
Oh, so it was your dad's church that you went to the revival.
Yeah.
So that's how the people knew you.
I got called to preach under my daddy. My daddy licensed me, and my daddy ordained me.
Wow. I know that was a special moment. I wish we had video like we did today or something like that. That would have been an amazing moment to see the pastor's son coming from the street and walking down the aisle and the message being so appropriate. How long before you preach your first sermon?
I got called to preach in May. And round about June, Daddy, it was two of us. We came around about the same time. Cedric Alexander, he's an assistant in the A&B church, superintendent or something like that. And so Daddy scheduled us to preach in July sometime. He said, y'all gonna preach your first sermon the third Sunday in October. You know, preach at night. That's, you know, you don't get no Sunday morning trial sermon. Not with that crowd. Right. George, I prepared my first sermon. I took it to Daddy, and it was a whole lot of anger, vitriol that I had. Daddy, he looked at it, he read it, and he didn't critique it. He said, well, that's a good start, but you go and spend a little more time on it. George, but you'll never. Now, we scheduled to preach the third Sunday. The Saturday, I kid you not, the Saturday before I was to preach my trial sermon, my past caught up with me. I was sitting in my daddy's driveway, garage rather, in his garage, and a bail bondsman came there and said my bail had been revoked, and I was arrested and taken to jail. Yeah. That's the Saturday. I'm supposed to preach Sunday night. Yeah. And I did some things that I hadn't given attention to. And just cause I became a Christian, called to preach don't mean doesn't mean they went anywhere. They was behind me, but they were still before the law.
Yes, sir.
And man, they arrested me, took me to jail, and Saturday night. And that Sunday came, and I'm in the Oakland City Jail, because they busted me in Richmond, but the offenses were for Oakland. One was, I think, a unemployment violation where I went and took some money where I shouldn't have, and another was I had got pulled over or something with suspended license, something like that. Driving with suspended license, something like that. And so Sunday came. I told the guys I was in that tank. I said, "Well, you all, I ain't supposed to be. I'm supposed to preach tonight, and I'm glad you all are here with me. So I'm supposed to preach, and I got a captive audience. I'm gonna preach tonight. If I got to preach,
yes, sir. So you preached your first sermon in the prison.
No, I was in Oakland jail, city jail. Let me tell you.
Oakland City
At
jail.
6 o'clock that evening, I heard the jailer coming, the keys. And I kid you not, the keys said, Alvin Bernstine, it's time to go. The keys, the jingling of the keys said, Alvin Bernstine, it's time to go. I left jail at 6:15, 6:30. I ran up to my mother's house, got into my little suit. I was in the pulpit at 7:30.
Wow.
I preached my first sermon coming out of the Oakland City jail. And I've never been back to jail other than to go preach to the prisoners, or I went to jail for protesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember that first sermon and what
Oh,
year
I
was
can tell you, my first sermon, John 3:16. It was entitled "Recognizing God's Eternal Gift." Whatever I brought to my daddy's house between that time and me preaching, it shifted altogether. And
wow.
My first sermon, although it may have had a little prophetic tinge to it, it was largely testimonial. Because my clothes, I remember my clothes, and I thank God that I can stand here today and say, I recognize God's eternal gift. And I raced on home, you know.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And what year was this?
1977.
Wow, the year I was born.
Yeah. 77, man. I've been
2
here.
years. Yeah.
43 years this year.
You get the bishop, and you're already preaching. What's your bishop? I love bishop stories. What's your bishop years like, and how does that shape? How does that begin? You talked about it in your intro. How does that begin to shape your preaching and ultimately finding your prophetic voice?
Well, I came to school, again, I was born. When I walked on the campus of Bishop, I was 25 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the students there, they was much younger than me. Like guys like Ralph and Freddie, they probably was at best 19 or 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I walked, they was kids. They had been, a lot of them guys had been, just left their mama's home. I had to live the life before I ever walked on the campus.
And what were you doing before then?
Before,
mm-hmm.
Well, I was hustling, man. I was out hustling. Okay. Yeah, and I was basically,
Okay. So how many years before you started to preach? Did you start to preach in October? You started bishop the next September?
No, I started preaching in 77.
Mm-hmm.
Daddy went to Bishop Dr. Newman, talked my daddy and some more preachers to go on to the L.K. Williams Ministers Institute on the campus of Bishop College. And Daddy came back and he had these, he picked up these cassette play, these sermons, it was on cassette. And there was one sermon he picked up that was preached by the Reverend Dr. Child Gilchrist Adams, Hartford Street. He just retired recently.
Detroit.
By Charlie Adams. And the sermon was entitled Sermons in Flesh. He preached from John 1, and the word became flesh. And man, he opened that thing up, man, with anchored. He opened it up, walking us through the civil rights movement, Then he said, bang, and then all of a sudden, wicked hate lash. That was his transition. Man, that guy preached, he was anchored in prophetic preaching, that Charles Adams, man. And man, he took that thing and boy, he wore me out. I listened to that sermon from 7 every night. I went to sleep listening to that sermon. Almost knew it by heart. And I say, Daddy, that's the kind of preaching I want to be around. I want to be that kind of preacher. That was in 78.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the A.H. Newman. I said, Doc, I want to go to Bishop College. Doc was the Congress president Nobody had ever come to him and said they wanted to go. No preacher wanted to go to college. And I said, Doc, I want to go, not just to college, I want to go to Bishop College. I was already in Laney, but I was getting a degree in business.
Right.
I want to go to Bishop College. Dr. Newman started a campaign to get me to Bishop College. And he rallied the association, and he used that Congress and to get me to Bishop College. The night that I left to drive to Bishop College, the Congress was open. And guess where it was open at? It was open at the Calvary Hill Missionary Baptist Church in Daly City.
Wow.
And the night Doc got up, and he raised an offering. Some of the old preachers was against it because they had never gone to school. And they thought the association shouldn't be doing that, nothing like that. They were against it. Doc's argument was, he said, if one man can raise 4 children and send them to college, surely 40-something churches can send a young preacher to college. That was his argument. And they raised me an offering. They gave me a check for $1,500. And Dr. Newman gave me his gas card. And I drove to Bishop College, my little brother and I taught my baby brother how to drive, driving from Oakland to Dallas. And that's how I got to Bishop College. See, I was old. But when I got there, I was on assignment. I ain't had no time to be driving around. I had already lived the life. I knew what girls smelled like. I need to be distracted by them. I knew what that was about.
Yeah.
I didn't need no party. I didn't party all, for years. I didn't need to go out on no party. I didn't need to go nowhere and smoke and get drunk. I'd already did all that stuff. So I lived in the library. I came with a mission, and it paid off. Then I had to prove, I came there, I think I must have had some sense of low self-esteem, but I believed that I was smart. I believed I had an intellect that could develop. I started off in remedial English, and Helen Benjamin, she tutored me in my English. Man, so I went to school. Them guys out there playing and partying and chasing women, but I didn't have no time. I was old. I went to school with a purpose. And so I did 3 years and 2. They told me I needed 3 years. They didn't accept all of my credits at Laney College. They didn't accept it, Hurtt, until it was time for me to graduate. And they said, oh yeah, these are acceptable. But I did 3 years and 2. I went straight through summer. I did 2 or 3 classes in the summer. It would be 100 degrees on the campus. We didn't even have air conditioning in the dormitory.
Wow.
But I went through school straight through, and I graduated in 1981. And Ralph and Freddie tell you, I graduated at the top of my class. Nobody in my family had ever gone to school and graduated before. My daddy and my mama was in the audience.
Wow.
Both of them dead now, but they saw their son, who they thought was going to get killed on the streets. They saw me walk across the stage, and I was also magna cum laude. I graduated at the top of my class. My last 3 semesters at school, I was 4.0. You ask Freddie, he tell you,
Wow. Yeah. And do you go back to Oakland at this point? What's the next move after graduation?
When I graduated from Bishop, I did drive back home, and but there was a restlessness in my spirit. Daddy, he gave me a little place. He tried to accommodate, but I said, no, Dad, I think I want to go back to school. There was a restlessness. I felt incomplete. And so I went to Newman. I told Doc what I wanted to do. And so Doc still helped. He helped me. I caught a bus. I went all the way to wherever that college is, somewhere right outside of Chicago, way out in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, you go by this preacher's house, and he gonna put you up to preach. You know, he had me little preaching engagements all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
They would give me $50, $75 or something. I'm on the bus, man. And I'm carrying a foot locker, because everything I own is in that foot locker. And so I ended up at Vanderbilt, and I shared you about my uncle.
Yeah.
He told me to stay at Vanderbilt.
Wow.
That one of the best decisions I ever made in my life.
Praise God. Did the Congress help you throughout Bishop and Vanderbilt, or?
Congress helped me throughout Bishop. When I got to a master's degree, they kind of cut me off. Everybody except for Newman.
Okay.
Dr. Newman was my academic benefactor throughout Vanderbilt.
Now, as we are in this pandemic, you are already ready, being the prophetic voice that you have. What are the benefits that you believe of your training and your passion for prophetic preaching now in light of this pandemic? We got the statistics that are coming out now showing how African Americans are affected in a larger rate than any other group. How beneficial is that now that we see these realities, not just this pandemic, but a unique one for us?
Well, the beautiful thing for me about Vanderbilt, although Vanderbilt was seeped in United Methodism, it was not a United Methodist school. It was a divinity school versus a seminary. And the difference is a seminary tends to have a denominational orientation,
Mm-hmm.
whereas a divinity school liberates itself from its denominational anchorage and just basically teach people how to think. And so Vanderbilt did not give me a denominational orientation. It helped me to learn how to think. And then for me to see Dr. Amos Jones working it out every Sunday, that helped me the more, because I saw. So it gave me tools. It didn't give me no theological perspective. It gave me tools to navigate theological perspectives, and then to try to make that live within my own community context.
Mm-hmm.
My master's thesis was around preaching, and it had
Mm-hmm.
to do with the shaping of a Black homiletic.
Okay.
Know? Right, yeah. And so that was my master's thesis.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was how to preach and develop a structure of preaching, homiletical model, which would frame preaching in a way that would address the challenges of the Black community. The day I graduated, a lady from the United Methodist Church came to me. And apparently she had been asking around for African Americans who might be interested in joining the United Methodist Church. And they pointed her in my direction. And she came to me and she said, Alvin, we've heard about you, and we would want to know. And I said, well, who's we? It's the United Methodist Church. Would you be interested in becoming a part of the United Methodist Church? We would put you in a pastorate. You would get a salary representative of your educational achievement. You would have a wonderful retirement, et cetera, full package coming up out of a grad school. And I told her, I appreciate it, and I thank you for the offer, but I feel my ministry is with my people. And however I'm sustained working with my people, I think I can live with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the type of preacher that you're hearing under Pastor Amos Jones, and type of preacher you're becoming at this point, is that being received well in the community? Are you hearing backlash, or you're just not even paying attention to that either way?
Well, I know the way I generally go at a passage, if I'm going to be largely prophetic, that's still not well received in the tradition of Black Baptist Church. You know, traditional Black Baptist Church is still, unfortunately, still beholden to the theological positions and thinking of our ex-slave masters. Yeah. You know, very few Black preachers at this time really have embraced and internalized the fact that people who held us in slavery were Christians. The way we became Christian was, it was a tool to perpetuate slavery, you know. And I like the way Manuel Scott said it years ago. He said, as he talked about it, he said, yes, they used it to try to keep us oppressed, but Doc said they made a tactical error. They introduced us to Jesus, you know, yeah, you know, and we were able to distinguish the Christian religion from the Jesus of faith. Yeah.
How much is Christ-centeredness in prophetic preaching?
Well, I think prophetic preaching coming from the Christian faith has to be Christ-centered because it's in Jesus where we are able to locate ourselves in terms of a people who understood oppression, people who lived in the experience of oppression, but also in Jesus, his responses to oppression. Because, I mean, his ministry opens up the spirit of, you know, the Lord God is upon me, and he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, you know, to liberate the oppressed. I'd go at it, that text, because it says this, George, it says, before he said a word, it says he went to the church in his hometown, as was his custom. And then it says this, it said they handed him the book.
Mm-hmm.
They handed him the book.
Right.
But the text says he opened it up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, white folk have handed us the book, but we got to open it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and when he opened the book up, he located himself and his ministry in the book. And if you keep reading it, it was not well accepted by his own hometown.
No, sir.
Right. Mm-hmm. The text says their eyes were upon him. And these were not eyes of admiration. These were eyes of indignation and rejection.
Mm.
So, yes.
What is your advice to the young preacher or just preacher in general that now has to stand before their people during this pandemic? And even yourself, your congregation, what are some of the things or themes or talking points that need to be addressed?
I think that it's helpful for preachers to acknowledge where we are. But this ain't the first time God's people have seen a pandemic or a plague. You know, a plague was the event that broke the back of Pharaoh. You know, we just got to make sure we got some blood on the doorpost. You know, so I preach such. I don't want our people to be alarmed by this, because God has seen this before. We acknowledge it, but what our people need more than a prophetic voice, they just give it a prophetic twist, but they need a pastor's heart and presence right now. Preachers need to be really pastoral right now. If there's ever a time where people need a preacher or the pastor to be present and to love them, it's right now. You know, leadership is made during a crisis. And so we will win our people's hearts now in a way that we would never win them if everything had stayed as it was.
What are some of the things that you're reading now, and that you would recommend that will help people develop that, or have read, that will help people develop that pastoral heart, and even scripture?
Well, always, you know, it's just a good time to go back and reread Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a helpful piece. It helps give us perspective. So the Thurman's work's always good. I don't think there's no better piece on how racism than Luminous Darkness by Howard Thurman. There's another thing I'm reading, what I'm referencing, and it's by Swinton. It's called Raging with Compassion.
Raging with Compassion.
Compassion, yeah, by Swinton.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a pastoral response to pervasive evil. Again, I think our people really need a pastoral presence right now, rather than for us to be so intense in addressing what's clearly a race-affected evil. But this didn't come. This, if anything, it came to reveal it, where it becomes irrefutable that if there were not so much racial inequities in America, our death list wouldn't be so high, because Black people would have access to health care, and Black people would not be living in places stacked on top of one another where the contagion becomes so so out of control. And then Black people would have resources where they can, basically protect themselves. So I think this will expose systemic racism, but I don't think it's a racist-driven reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Can you, and this is important, can you just unpack the difference between systemic racism and that which is just conscious, vicious, what that you just made that contrast?
Yeah. Well, systemic racism is the thinking, it's the teaching, it's the structural evils that are in place in the society, that there for one reason only, and that's to uphold white supremacy. And it's everywhere.
Black inferiority.
It's profusively, for lack of a better term, it's throughout all of the systems in America. You name one, it's there.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's there, and you see it every day.
And the pandemic is being exposed for the healthcare system.
It's exposing the inadequate. Yeah.
What is some of the sermons that you've preached during this time to sort of cultivate that pastoral heart to your people, be it formally or informally?
Well, my last sermon I preached this past Sunday, I got it from the lectionary. And I didn't do the normal Palm Sunday text. I went to the lectionary and I used Psalm 31 as it picks up down in verse 9 through 18. And I talked about the testimony of a virus victim. And that text is so descriptive of what we are experiencing right now. And I drew from the fact, and this was a pastoral approach to it, that most of us, we became Christians because of someone's testimony. The Christian faith is testimonial driven. The Bible is basically a book of testimonies. And testimonies are those experiences, are those presentations that people share with us that convince us to become a follower of believe in God and follow the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I raised up that perhaps if we would spend some time unpacking the testimony of someone who is clearly living in a virus-like context, it might help us during this time. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right. Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've seen in the news that sort of gotten you frustrated, or you wish you could have, that you want to would love to have a platform to speak against or address?
Well, I think one thing, you got to get all these white people off the platform. Yeah, right. When you look at, and I'm loving Cuomo, De Blasio, he married to a black woman. These are white men. And then when you look at the White House, their task force, those are white people. They got this little brother, but he seemed to me to have been neutered for the most part. But I think yesterday, he had a breakthrough. That's the first time that the Surgeon General, because I don't even know where this guy came from. I ain't never heard of him in my life. But he seemed so neutered up until yesterday.
Yeah.
Yesterday he had a breakthrough because it became clear that this virus, or rather the death of the virus and the infection of the virus, is disproportionately affecting people of color. So he had a breakthrough because he had to start looking at his own history and even looking at his own self, that he's vulnerable.
Yeah, that was a big move. I think much his demeanor is kind of laid back from his military training and position, and how that's limited in that time. So for him to do that was like you said, was a breakthrough, was a big thing, and he really actually got the conversation rolling. Now you hear news networks and articles being talked about it this thing. So that was appreciative. Tell us why you said what you said, the importance of diversity in a task force like this, and you already answered it, but just to kind of nail that home a little bit more. Some people will hear and say, why you don't want white people on there? It's not that. It's about the importance of the diversity of perspectives, opinions, and sensitivities to certain cultures, that you're not going to be sensitive to another culture if you're not in a part of that culture. But go ahead.
Right. Because what's driving that task force is Trump. And nothing drives Trump more than Trump. And so what Trump's, his measurement is always driven by the economy. His is always about money. It's not about lives. He's saying that, but we know that his big thing is about how much money is being made. Even that drug that he's been promoting, he has stock in the drug. I mean, he becomes enriched if that drug, can you imagine how much money you would have if you had something that's going, how many million people, 200 something million people gonna have to take, do you know how rich you would be? Yeah, he has stock in the company.
Yeah, it's medically and economically unethical for him to promote that drug, and politically unethical for him to do so.
But no one wants to bust him. So he's getting people out of the way. Watch his moves. He got rid of this inspector general, and he went and got rid of another one because your boy down there in Southern Cal, Schiff, he's going to construct this like they had the 9/11 commission, where there's going to be a commission that's going to study the governmental response to the pandemic, to COVID-19. And once they study that, they're going to discover that they held back the truths of this pandemic for months before they ever took it serious because of Donald Trump and his greed and his, his blind obsession with money, particularly money, that's going to benefit white people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Top 5 influential preachers slash best preachers. Our generation, we love top 5 lists. Who's on your top 5 and why?
Well, I've got to start with Gardner Taylor.
Yes, sir.
Late Gardner Taylor, because of his, the stature in which he presented preaching. He was just so incredibly colorful in the language that he brought to preaching. So he's certainly right up there. I don't think there's anybody who could stand and grab you. I mean, he just literally grabbed you. You going with him. I don't care who you are, you're going with him.
Yes, sir.
That would be Gardner Taylor. Then I would bring in Sam Proctor. Proctor was he was prophetic, but he was subtle with it. He was almost like Paul. You know, if you study the prophets really didn't have no churches. You know, the closest thing you get to someone with a prophetic voice having a church would be Jesus. He had a core group, but I don't think he had no church. We made it a church. And then Paul was very subtle, but he was subversive. And I saw Proctor sort of like that. You know, Proctor could analyze, and Proctor understood cultural influences. He could read the times. And then his sermon construction, I think, is an analysis of the sermon. It's probably second to none. Manuel Scott Sr., I think, was probably one of the most creative minds that ever mounted the pulpit. He was just amazingly creative, and he had a pastor's heart, but he had a prophetic zeal. I mean, he understood what prophecy, the prophetic preaching voice should also always be aimed toward, and that's the church. You know, we like going and speaking to City Hall, but if you read the prophets were very critical of Israel, right, and Israel's complicity in its own oppression. You know,
yes,
yeah. So it's Gardner. It would be Proctor, Manuel, Caesar Clark, because of his folksiness. Yeah, he had incredible folksiness, and I don't think nobody could celebrate like Caesar.
No, sir.
Yeah, he had a folksiness, and he had this sort of down-home approach to the text. He could make that text live. He was anchored in on that text. And then I love Harry Wright. Nobody talked much about Harry Wright. Harry Wright, he's so conversationally smooth. When you hear Haynes, you hearing Harry Wright with a combination of Manuel and Jeremiah, I think. Right, yeah.
Bringing it all together.
But Haynes' smoothness is Harry Wright all the way.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
You memorable sermons. Some of the memorable sermons that to this day stand out to you. I know you mentioned
Sermons in Flesh. Sermon in Flesh changed my preaching world.
And that was Charles Adams from Detroit.
Charles Adams from Detroit. I used to give copies away when we had cassettes because I wanted everybody to hear And but I can't even find it now. It's buried somewhere. And so I called up to the church to see if they had copies of it. They can't even locate it.
Wow.
Man, it was, man, that's classic. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Sermons in Flesh stands out. Proctor's sermon on, he did a piece on, he done so many things. But when he talks about Mephibosheth, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that stands out. No, beauty, yeah, beauty, from ashes to beauty. Something, yeah, Doc did so much, man. Doc was amazing.
Right.
Uh,
Absolutely.
E.L. Branch has a classic sermon. It's one of the best I've ever heard anywhere. And where he talks about the Jericho Road. Classic.
E.L. Branch from Detroit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, he's an incredible integration of an intellectual with the kind of C.L. Franklin
Yeah.
folksiness. Yeah.
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 I'm from Detroit, so I was born and raised in Detroit. So
Yeah, man. EL is phenomenal. Yeah. I'm trying to think of this lady. She preached this text, Claudette Copeland. I can't think of the sermon. But man, she is certain. I can't think of the title of the sermon, but it was awesome. She is phenomenal. But you want sermon titles.
No, we're fine. We're live here with the great Pastor Alvin Bernstine, and Dr. Alvin Bernstine have been kind enough in the midst of all of us being busy to jump on live with us and talk. He's given us great information about his background and been transparent with us about his journey into the faith and prophetic preaching. And we have gleaned so much from him in this time together. And those of you that are listening like me, you're the better for doing so. Can you tell us just where we can find you, your church, or we can find your services streamed, or different things that you're working on, books, projects, and so on?
Yeah, I'm at the Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church in Richmond, California. We post our services by 10:30 on Facebook and YouTube Sunday morning. We do Bible study. I do on Wednesdays. We Zoom that from 7 to 8. Our church school takes place at 9 on Sunday. It's Zoom as well. This Friday, Good Friday, on our Facebook page, we'll have the 7 last word. 7 phenomenal, amazing preachers will present the 7 last words. And that's the Bethlehem presence during the pandemic. Then we got some in-house stuff that we do, like we do Tuesday talks. Church just get together and just talk. We do that via Zoom, so we can, although we're the church ungathered, we're trying to stay the church connected. My latest piece is, in fact, the guy quoted it this morning, who was infected with the virus. It's called The Evening and the Morning. And in there, I speak of how the Spirit of God hovered over the darkness. And the brother, he quoted me this morning as he's going through the darkness of the COVID-19. He's infected. He said, I believe God's Spirit is hovering over the darkness. And so that's a piece where I look at the creation story, and I call it the liberation primer of the creation story. Most of us, we took the bait of our slave master, and we think that story, the creation story, is about how the world began. But no, if you understand the biblical story, particularly the people who constructed it, it's a protest. It's a hymn. It's a hymn of resistance, and the cadence or the chorus of it is still in the Bible, so I ain't making it up. It's and the evening and the morning was the first
Gotcha.
day. Yeah, you go read it. And then the evening
Yes,
and
sir.
the morning was the second day. Well, that's an interesting construct, the evening and the morning, because we usually don't look at days starting like that. For us, days start in the morning and ends in the evening. But the evening is a metaphor. It's a metaphor that was used to describe the Babylonian experience, because that story comes out of the Babylonian exile.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not a cosmogony, a creation story. It's an Antigone. It's a resistance story. It's against the cosmogony that has been constructed by oppressive power.
Mm-hmm.
I have a book that Judson Press has been holding on to it, but I think I'm going to release it myself. And it comes from a dialectical expression that I heard from the people down in the South. Um, and I used to preach, and somebody would always come up to me and say, "You hope me." And I thought, what in the world are you talking about? You hope me. Uh, but I began to appreciate it, because oppressed people, we shouldn't have no loyalty to the king's language. And so they took a noun and transformed it into a verb. And so the title of it's a compilation of daily meditation. I sat for a whole year. And every day I walked through the Bible on that theme. Uh, and so it's called Hopeful Meditations. I,
Mm.
I think it may be very relevant right now. So I may just release it myself.
Yeah,
It's called Hopeless Lord.
gotcha.
Prophetic Meditations. Yeah.
Amen. Thank you so much for taking your time. It's been inspiring, convicting, challenging. If you don't mind, can you just close us out in time of prayer?
Yes. Oh God, we bless and praise you as we uh, try to grope our way through the darkness of this pandemic season. And I pray, oh God, that your ministers, brothers, and sisters will not lose faith, and to know, God, that even in a dark situation, you will produce light. Thank you,
Mm.
Jesus, who came into the world in a dark situation. He claimed that he was the light of the world, and he asked us to be lights in the world. And I pray, God, that vessels of light would spring forth in this dark time. God, as Jesus was crucified, he did not even allow crucifixion to diminish his life. I pray, God, that your preachers, your ministers, and that your people would cry out, even from the crucifixion of a pandemic, God, that we would believe that yes, it may be Dark Friday. Thank God, Sunday is coming. Thank you for Reverend George Hurtt for his ministry. We pray, God, you use it to expand the kingdom. In all things, we give you the glory and give you the honor. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Doc, enjoy